what if, the greatest period of safety and success and cultural integration for a minority group isn't actually proof that they've finally been accepted?
Right.
Like, what if, historically speaking, that exact peak of success is actually the primary trigger for their downfall?
It's a huge question, and it completely upends the way modern democracies teach the concept of the social contract.
Yeah.
Because we are taught that if you contribute, if you weave yourself into the fabric of a nation, you are permanently protected by it. Like, it's a done deal.
Yeah, that's the promise. Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are taking a deep dive into a text that, honestly, takes a sledgehammer to that exact assumption.
It really does.
We are looking at an essay from June 2026. It's by Lev Neymotin, and it's titled Exodus from America.
A very heavy title.
Super heavy. And I want to set the scene by describing the artwork that accompanies this piece, because it immediately calibrates your expectations before you even read a word.
Yeah, the visual's striking.
It is. So you are looking at the back of a family. There's a father wearing a kippah, a mother, and two children. And one of the kids is holding this small Israeli flag. And they're carrying suitcases, right? Just walking across this wooden bridge. And behind them, they are leaving this dark, tempestuous, almost rotting American cityscape.
Yeah, like a storm is swallowing it.
Exactly. You can see the Statue of Liberty and One World Trade fading into this dark storm. And they're walking toward this brilliantly sunlit, golden Jerusalem. And across the top, in stark letters, it just reads, "A warning, not a panic."
Which, I mean, the visual alone does a lot of heavy lifting there. It establishes this mood of deliberate departure.
Right.
Isn't some chaotic panic stampede, It's a purposeful walk away from a structure that the artist, and obviously the author, implies is fundamentally failing.
And as we go through this, you, the listener, you might find yourself nodding along in deep agreement,
Right.
or you might find yourself absolutely furious with his conclusions.
Totally. It's polarizing.
Very. And our job today isn't to tell you who is right or to endorse these viewpoints. We aren't taking any sides here.
Right. We're just the guides.
Exactly.
Right.
But we have to warn you, this essay is intense. It's highly provocative and deeply personal.
Yeah, and Neymotin is very clear about that. He explicitly states his worry is, quote, brutal.
And he wants it presented that way.
Right. He demands to state it brutally. He literally says, do not soften the language, express my strong opinion. It's totally mine. No excuses, please.
So we are honoring that.
Yeah.
We aren't going to water down his vocabulary or, sanitize his argument into polite modern speak. We're going to crack open the architecture of his argument so you can see exactly how he builds it.
Which means we really have to start with his opening comparison, because it is engineered to shock the reader right out of the gate.
Oh, yeah.
He compares the current psychological condition of American Jews directly to the psychological condition of German Jews right before the Holocaust.
And I have to push back immediately on that just as a reflex, because comparing contemporary America to Nazi Germany, that usually shuts down a conversation instantly.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like an inflammatory exaggeration, right? It just ignores the reality of American legal protections.
And to be fair, the author anticipates that exact rejection. He knows you're going to feel that way.
Does he walk it back?
No, but he goes out of his way to clarify that he is not making a crude, literal comparison. He explicitly states that America is not building concentration camps.
Okay, so he's not talking about government policy.
Exactly. He is focused entirely on a specific psychological trap. He argues that German Jews felt entirely unequivocally rooted, like they saw themselves as Germans first.
Right. They built the science, they drove the economy.
They died in Germany's wars. Their Jewishness was practically a footnote to their national identity. But then, almost overnight, their Jewishness was forced violently back onto them from the outside.
So the parallel he is drawing, it's the mental whiplash. That feeling of being perfectly at home, perfectly assimilated, only to discover that your host society still considers you fundamentally alien.
Precisely. And he uses this to introduce a concept he calls the old pattern.
The old pattern.
Right. Historically, he argues that the Jewish question doesn't return because Jews fail to integrate. It returns when they integrate too well.
I really struggle with the mechanics of that, honestly.
How so?
Well, from a sociological standpoint, if a minority group builds your hospitals, writes your literature, and acts as a pillar of your civic life, wouldn't the host society actively want to protect them?
You would think so.
Yeah. The logic of this old pattern feels incredibly cynical.
Well, what's fascinating here is how he maps out the psychology of the host nation to answer that exact question. He argues that hyperintegration transforms the minority into a mirror.
Weird.
Yeah, a mirror that reflects the society's own insecurities. The surrounding culture looks at this highly successful integrated group, and the narrative just flips.
Flips how?
Success is suddenly recast as control. Broad visibility is recast as a hidden conspiracy. If the minority is distinct, they're accused of disloyalty. If they are confident, they're branded arrogant.
Wow. And he brings in centuries of historical receipts to prove this mechanism isn't a fluke, right?
Oh, yeah, he goes way back.
He points out that in ancient Egypt, you had a benevolent pharaoh who elevated Joseph to the highest levels of government. But then right after that, a new pharaoh takes over and enslaves the entire population.
And it doesn't stop there. Look at Spain.
Right, Spain, you had the Golden Age centuries of absolute brilliance, where Jews were deeply embedded in royal courts and finance.
Which made them the perfect visible scapegoats when the political and religious winds shifted.
Exactly, ending in the expulsion of 1492. And he brings up Germany, Russia. The pattern is always integration, followed by a period of cultural flowering, followed by annihilation or expulsion.
The author's point is that the underlying theology of the host nation might change, right? Or the specific political excuse might change.
But the mechanism is the same.
The cyclical mechanism remains identical. Because the pattern is so old, he argues that Jews have zero moral right to pretend they haven't seen it coming.
Which brings up that really intense lesson from his father.
Yeah, he shares this lesson. Wherever you live outside of Israel, you must be prepared to flee.
Which I have to say sounds borderline paranoid to anyone raised in an optimistic Western democracy.
And he insists it is a discipline, not a paranoia.
What's the difference, in his view?
Well, paranoia is thinking your neighbor wants to kill you. The discipline of memory is recognizing that your long-term survival has never, ever depended on the perpetual gratitude of the host nation.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does it depend on?
It depends on maintaining mobility, resources, and the acute situational awareness to recognize when a door that has been propped open for decades is quietly starting to close.
That raises a massive psychological dissonance, though.
How do you mean?
If this cycle is so historically inevitable, why did American Jews, for the last century, believe they had outsmarted history? Like, why did they think they broke the wheel?
Because America genuinely presented itself as the great exception.
The great exception.
Yeah, it wasn't merely Europe with better weather or, a more tolerant monarch. America is a constitutional civilization.
Right, built from the ground up on the protection of speech, religion, minority rights.
Exactly. It allowed a level of public and professional flourishing that was practically unimaginable in any prior era of exile.
And he is actually very blunt about the gratitude owed to America, right? He doesn't just dismiss the American experiment.
No, not at all. But he draws a brutal distinction between gratitude and strategy.
Yeah.
He argues that American Jews fell into the trap of emotional dependency. They looked at the Constitution and treated it like a magic force field.
Like it could deflect anything.
Yeah. They assumed that a society's underlying culture cannot rot as long as the legal framework remains intact.
They mistook their influence for permanent.
Precisely. And the author argues that when you stop feeling like you live in exile, you lose that vital discipline of memory we talked about. You become complacent.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because to explain how that American culture is rotting beneath the law, he diagnoses what he calls the new anti-Semitism.
And he separates it entirely from the old-school country club bigotry.
Yeah, the polite society exclusion, where you couldn't buy a house in a certain zip code or join a specific golf club.
Right, because the old anti-Semitism viewed the Jew as an inferior alien outsider who needed to be kept away. But the new anti-Semitism operates on a completely different psychological axis.
He calls it a moral inversion, doesn't he?
He does. In this modern framework, the Jew is no longer seen as a subhuman outsider. Instead, the Jew is recast as the ultimate symbol of hyperpower, of colonialism, of white privilege, and of structural oppression.
It's an ideological rewrite.
Yeah?
And he points the finger straight at the modern university system.
No, absolutely.
He doesn't look at campuses as just, places of learning. He actually calls them production facilities for the next generation's moral vocabulary.
Think about it like a cultural operating system update.
I like that analogy.
Right. A radical theory starts in a niche campus seminar. It rewrites the base code of what is considered moral or immoral, But it doesn't stay on campus.
Because those students graduate.
Exactly. They graduate, and that new moral vocabulary trickles down. It becomes the standard operating procedure for corporate HR departments, for journalism, for government bureaucracies, for legal frameworks.
So when a Jewish student learns that being openly Jewish or publicly supporting Israel makes them socially radioactive in a freshman dorm, the author is saying we shouldn't view that as just a phase of youthful rebellion.
No, not at all. That is the future moral baseline of the society speaking to us.
And he ruthlessly rejects the comfort of partisan politics here, which I think is a crucial point for us to cover.
It's huge. You cannot simply blame one political extreme and seek refuge in the other.
Because he views this new anti-Semitism as a highly adaptable civilizational infection.
Right. On the left, it utilizes the vocabulary of justice, equity, and anti-colonialism to brand the Jew as the oppressor.
But then you look at right, and it uses the vocabulary of nationalism, anti-globalism, and deep state paranoia.
Yeah, whether they are targeting Shabbat, the so-called neocons, or international bankers.
In both ecosystems, the actual Jewish person just disappears. The Jew becomes the symbolic operator inside someone else's rage. You just become the easy, universal explanation for whatever happens to be broken in their worldview.
Which brings us to the catalyst.
Right.
If the mechanism is this underlying resentment of integration and the vehicle is this new moral vocabulary, what activated it so fiercely right now?
And he zeroes in entirely on the existence of Israel.
He does. The author argues that Israel provokes a highly specific, visceral hatred because it fundamentally breaks the historical narrative of Jewish helplessness.
Israel is the unassimilated Jew.
Exactly. It is the Jew with sovereign borders, with an intelligence service, with soldiers, and with unapologetic hard power.
And he frames the global debate around anti-Zionism in a way that just bypasses normal political discourse.
Yeah, he acknowledges that Israelis themselves argue ferociously over their own policies, their borders, and their government.
Sure, they protest all the time.
But he argues the global movement of anti-Zionism is not a critique of policy. It is a civilizational test.
A civilizational test.
At its core, it is a refusal to accept that Jewish sovereignty is legitimate.
So the baseline demand of Israel is essentially accept that a Jewish state exists and stop attempting to dismantle it.
Right.
But the opposing demand, in his view, isn't asking for a policy change. It's declaring that the very existence of the state is the moral offense.
And the consequence of that is just staggering for the diaspora.
Because if Israel is successfully turned into the ultimate, globally recognized symbol of evil,
then every single Jew, regardless of their personal politics, is going to be drafted to answer for it.
Okay, so what does this all mean for someone who decides to just, opt out? Let's say you're an American Jew. You see this ideological storm brewing. Can't you just engage a sort of social camouflage?
Oh.
Don't wear the star, don't mention Israel, lean into the secular parts of your life, and just play dead. Just wait it out.
He absolutely eviscerates that strategy.
He does not hold back.
He calls it the dangerous, pathetic illusion of quiet Jewishness. The idea that you can bury your identity deep inside your private memory and somehow sneak past history.
Right, because he argues that enemies know exactly how to excavate that identity. You might try to forget you are Jewish, but history will remember for you.
Exactly. And he points to the Shabbat movement as the ultimate counterexample.
Shabbat.
Yeah, Shabbat is visibly, audibly, undeniably Jewish. They put massive menorahs in public squares, they wear distinct clothing, they operate openly in thousands of cities.
And because they absolutely refuse to adopt that quiet Jewishness, they attract immense suspicion and conspiracy.
Which proves the author's underlying thesis.
How so?
The suspicion directed at Shabbat tells you absolutely nothing about Shabbat and everything about the host society. It proves that what these societies eventually find intolerable isn't a specific policy or behavior, it is Jewish vitality itself.
Just existing openly and thriving is treated as a provocation.
Exactly. If you are despised when you are weak and stateless and suspected when you are strong and sovereign, the issue isn't how you behave.
The issue is the host society's profound inability to let Jews simply exist as authors of their own story. Okay, we have thoroughly mapped out his diagnosis of the problem here. Hiding doesn't work. Integration accelerates the backlash. America's legal shield is rotting from the cultural inside.
It's a grim picture.
Very. So we have to move into his prescription. What does actual physical response look like in the face of this?
He focuses heavily on the concept of the window of time,
Right.
and he absolutely refuses to give a neat, measurable timeline. He won't say, oh, the collapse happens in 5 years or 20 years.
Because if he gives a false precision, people will just discount the warning if the deadline passes peacefully.
Exactly. Instead, he asks the reader to look at the signs that the window of safety is actively narrowing right now.
And the realities he lists, they aren't theoretical. There are things happening today.
Yeah.
It's parents quietly taking their children aside and telling them to tuck their Star of David necklace into their shirt before walking across a university quad.
It's graduate students scrubbing their resumes of any Zionist affiliation just to keep their friends or secure a fellowship.
It's the fact that armed tactical guards have become a completely normalized, unquestioned requirement for simply attending a synagogue on a Saturday morning.
He argues that the window of safety is technically still open. You can still legally move your assets.
Right. You can still buy property abroad.
Yeah.
You can acquire a passport and make the choice to leave with your dignity intact.
But those everyday realities you just listed, that is the sound of the window sliding shut.
The true danger isn't that cattle cars suddenly appear tomorrow morning.
No, the danger is the slow, creeping, psychological normalization of a life where your identity feels perpetually conditional, guarded, and cornered.
Which brings us back to the title, Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to clarify what he means by that, because he draws a sharp, critical line between an exodus and a panic.
Yes, panic is what happens when you wait until the door is already locked.
A desperate stampede to the airport.
Right, liquidating your life savings for pennies and abandoning your elderly relatives in terror. Panic is the total absence of strategy.
It seems like he wants people to view their relationship with Israel not as some sentimental vacation home or, a place where you symbolically plant a tree once a decade.
No, he wants them to treat it like a fire escape.
He uses this brilliant phrase, survival architecture.
Survival architecture is a structural, deliberate transfer of your center of gravity.
So it's highly practical.
Extremely practical. It means securing the passports now. It means moving a portion of your financial assets so you aren't trapped by capital controls.
Learning Hebrew.
Actively learning Hebrew. Ensuring your professional skills are transferable across borders. And perhaps most crucially, giving your children a living, breathing, practical relationship with Israel, rather than just a mythological one.
He pushes this heavily into a theological space, too, which I really wasn't expecting.
It's an interesting pivot.
Yeah. Because for generations, the diaspora has relied on this concept of praying for redemption, right? Waiting for history or the divine to miraculously gather the exiles.
And he argues that sitting completely still while the tectonic plates of history rearrange themselves underneath you, that is not faith.
It's passivity disguised as piety.
Exactly. If you look at the foundational stories, the exodus from Egypt wasn't just a miracle. It required the physical, terrifying act of literally walking into the desert.
And the historical return to Zion required the grueling physical act of draining swamps and building infrastructure.
He is making the case that true movement requires courage. You cannot wait in the comfort of your integrated life until history forces your hand. You have to act while the choice to act is still yours.
So pulling all of these uncompromising threads together, Lev Naimoten's bottom line is that the golden age of American Jewry might not end on a Tuesday in a spectacular crash.
No, America might indeed remain, in his words, better for longer compared to the collapse of European communities.
But the era of operating under the assumption that America is a permanent, unquestioned home, he declares that era definitively over.
The illusion of the great exception has shattered.
And as we wrap up this incredibly heavy deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, building on the architecture of his argument.
Yeah, if the author is entirely correct, if the greatest, most prosperous periods of diaspora flourishing inevitably trigger this psychological mechanism where integration breeds suspicion and success invites backlash.
Does the very concept of a permanent home outside of your own sovereign borders fundamentally contradict the mechanics of human history?
It's the ultimate question. Can you ever truly achieve permanence if you are living in a house where someone else ultimately holds the deed and authors the laws?
It is a profound, deeply unsettling question. And it forces you to look at the landscape of society differently. You might not see the clean, obvious fracture of a broken bone in the X-ray of current events.
But if you stare at the structural stress long enough,
you have to decide for yourself whether the foundation is holding or whether it's time to start deliberately walking toward the exit. Thank you for joining us as we cracked open this intense, thought-provoking deep dive. We'll catch you next time.